Inside the movement, there were rules. Some were spoken openly from the platform, others were understood quietly through culture, expectation, and fear. For many members, obedience was closely tied to spiritual safety. Stay faithful, stay submissive, stay in fellowship. Because disobedience was rarely seen as simply making a mistake. It could mean rebellion, spiritual weakness, even separation from God. And over time, many former members say that fear became woven into everyday life inside the fellowship. Not always through shouting, not always through punishment, but through repetition, expectation, correction, and the constant pressure to remain spiritually right. Tonight, we examine the culture of discipline, fear, and exclusion inside Revival Centres International, and the emotional cost of disobedience. Correction was often presented as love. Pastors and senior ministry were viewed not only as leaders, but as spiritual authorities appointed by God. Members were encouraged to trust leadership, even when they didn't fully understand decisions being made. And for many people, being corrected spiritually carried enormous emotional weight. Former members described being spoken to privately, being monitored closely, or feeling pressure to conform socially inside the assembly. Not necessarily through physical force, but through spiritual expectation, because inside the movement, obedience was often associated with humility, and questioning authority could quickly become associated with pride, rebellion, or spiritual danger. For many members, the fear was not simply, what will people think? The fear was, what if they're right? For many children raised inside the movement, these beliefs were not experienced as abstract theology. They were real, immediate, personal. Ella remembers growing up believing the second coming of Christ would happen before she reached adulthood. She was told she would never live past 16. And as a child, she believed it completely. Can you imagine growing up with that in the back of your mind? I want that to sit with you for a minute. The world ends with the second coming of Christ when you're 16. And then every day after your 16th birthday feels like borrowed time. Every mistake becomes terrifying. Every doubt matters. Every wrong thought suddenly carries eternal consequences. So you pray for salvation again, for the slightest transgression, just in case. And the alternative? For those believed to have failed to find salvation, the future was terrifying. 7 years under the reign of the Antichrist, war, judgment, natural disasters, divine punishment. For adults, these ideas may have existed as theology, but for children raised inside the movement, they could feel completely real, immediate, and inescapable. Morality inside the movement was taken extremely seriously. Relationships, sexuality, courtship, and behavior were closely tied to spiritual standing. Former members describe intense pressure surrounding dating, purity, and the expectations around marriage. Over time, discipline surrounding morality became one of the most controversial aspects of church culture. Internal documents from the 90s reveal growing conflicts surrounding what leadership described as fornication policy. Debates emerged over restoration, forgiveness, marriage pressure, and whether certain members could remain in the fellowship after moral failure. For many people, shame became deeply connected to spirituality itself, and the fear of public exposure or exclusion could be overwhelming. For some members, disobedience carried consequences far beyond embarrassment. Former members describe people being removed from fellowship, socially isolated, or quietly distanced from community life. And because church often formed a person's entire social world, the impact could be devastating. Friends disappeared, relationships changed, families became divided. And many former members describe the same painful experience, the sudden feeling of becoming spiritually unsafe overnight. For people raised inside the movement, disfellowship was not simply losing a church. It could feel like losing identity, community, certainty, and salvation itself. Many former members say that they learned very early to stay quiet, not necessarily because they were directly threatened, but because questioning things carried emotional risk. People learned to suppress doubt internally, to avoid conflict, to avoid attention, to avoid becoming spiritually suspect. And for some, that silence lasted years after leaving. Because even after walking away physically, the fear often remained. Fear of judgment, fear of punishment, fear of being wrong. And for many survivors of high control environments, rebuilding trust in themselves can take years. High control environments rarely appear dangerous from the outside. Many are built on sincere belief, built on community, built on structure, and have certainty. But for some people, the emotional cost of disobedience becomes enormous, especially for children raised inside systems where fear, identity, and salvation become deeply intertwined. These stories are not being told to mock belief. They're being told because many former members say the effects followed them long after leaving. And because somewhere, someone listening may still believe they are completely alone. You are not. In the next episode, we begin examining the growing fractures inside the movement and the internal conflicts that would eventually erupt policy. I'm Hawley, and this is Taboo Talk, Season 2.